This is episode number 172 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And in this podcast, we're going to take another look on delivering the color red to cocktails and so much more. There's a lot packed into this with techniques and ingredients and a whole side conversation about some cool topics that we're really kind of currently wrestling with and trying to tackle in craft cocktails. So I think you're going to love it as much as I did, and I hope you enjoy. Hey everybody, so we have a special guest today on Mixology Talk. I know I've talked about this a lot. I've told many people my feelings on learning more about mixology and learning from people that really know what they're doing. And my recommendation is always to seek out the advice of a pastry chef. They work with a lot of the same techniques that we use. They're really well trained and they know what they're doing with flavor combinations, colors, and other ingredients. So I am very excited to have an honest to goodness pastry chef with us. Thank you for joining us, Amy.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about where you work and kind of what got you really excited and interested in the wonderful world of pastries?
Well, I live and work in Eugene, Oregon. I work for a restaurant company called Marche Provisions, and it is essentially a French-based restaurant. We work for Marche, which is our fine dining concept. We work very seasonally based. Stephanie Pearl Kimmel, the chef that started the restaurant, she's widely considered like the Alice Waters of the Pacific Northwest. She and Alice actually started at the same time, but Stephanie realized how awesome the Willamette Valley was, so she settled here and made her life here. And a lot of the same stuff that Alice Waters did to really bring the importance of working locally and seasonally and encouraging small plot farmers where you're at versus seeking out larger, more conglomerated farmers. Stephanie has done the same for the Willamette Valley, and she really was huge and at the forefront of teaching people on the West Coast what we have to offer in the Willamette Valley. And so it's a huge change from my previous life. I've been here now for 4 years and working under Stephanie for 2 years. Before this, I lived the exact opposite life. And I was a corporate pastry chef for the Cheesecake Factory Incorporated. Okay. And I did, so when I say 180, I mean 180.
Wow.
So I lived in LA. I helped develop recipes for 2 different concepts under the Cheesecake Factory umbrella for Grand Lux Cafe and Rock Sugar Pan Asian Kitchen. And, there it's the complete opposite. We need to make something be the same in South Florida that it is in Denver, that it is in Los Angeles. So for me I took 2 years off from cooking to just focus on being a stay-at-home mom, and had this opportunity arise with Marche Provisions. And at 43, I was essentially reteaching myself my whole profession because I just had to completely change gears. And so it's been really awesome to get to live in an area where you really can build relationships with the farmers. And, just to be able to focus on seasonality, which you certainly can't do when you need to have strawberry cheesecake on the menu all across the world, 365. So it's really been great. And we have the fine dining concept, and then we also have our more fast casual provisions, which is like it's a fast casual restaurant. We do breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and there we do all French-based pastries, macarons, viennoiserie. We do everything, bread production. So for the first time, I'm working for a true full-scale bakery where we're doing everything from, artisan bread production all the way down to ice cream. It's everything. So it's been great. I love it. It's been a huge, huge challenge. And it's just really awesome to get to live in a place like Eugene that is relatively small, but has just a huge abundance of just such incredible product to work with. It's amazing. If no one's been to the Willamette Valley, please come to the Willamette Valley. We'd love you to come visit. But just please don't stay. We're running out of housing.
It's terrible there. Nobody's going to like it. Visit and leave.
It's horrible. Yes, nobody wants trees and forests and beautiful clean air.
And a balanced life. I mean, lifestyle. Who wants that? Oh, that's too funny. So this must be a pretty significant changeover from the two concepts. I mean, from the Cheesecake Factory, where you said, you have everything at your disposal, but the really on consistency. So you're going to have a whole different arsenal of ingredients that you have to incorporate and use and really kind of lean on to make that possible, versus a super hyper seasonal menu where you really have to kind of be able to capture those flavors as they come and really kind of switch up things. It's got to be a complete, like you said, 180 on as far as techniques and ingredients and everything else.
Oh, total 180. And it's French, where before everything I did was either Asian, which I had to teach myself that, or it was like New American. So I'm like having to learn how to really make French-based desserts, which I never really had to do before. Rhubarb, there's no rhubarb in Southern California. There's not, like, I had to learn rhubarb. I'm like, what is a tayberry? Like so many things that I'm like, y'all are acting like this is everywhere. Trust me, it is very exclusive to this area. I like hazelnuts too, but oh my God, they're in everything.
That's
so no,
funny.
it's a complete 180, but it's been great. I'm so lucky that I've had this opportunity, at this stage in my career. Let's face it, it's a finite time. One can be a chef. So I'm lucky I had this opportunity before I had to hang up my robes.
Well, we're so lucky to have you. And I think you're going to bring a lot of knowledge to this conversation. I'm really excited to talk to you about some of the techniques that you like or you have to use with the seasonal ingredients. And I think it's going to be a really fun conversation. So thank you again. So as you look at kind of your techniques and your menu and your experiences as a pastry chef, the focus of this podcast really is on kind of enhancing colors or bringing colors to cocktails. Are there any really basic techniques that you really feel kind of belong in that area of adding color to a menu?
I used to do, when I was actually with the cheese, I worked very closely with the bar R&D team there as well. And, it is really, really hard. It's pretty much impossible to add color without flavors because the flavonoids and the terpenes are so closely linked. It's all in those same cells. The same cells that are making the color are the same cells that are making the flavor. So it's almost impossible to get the color without the flavor unless you want to work with pigment powders. And pigment powders are used a lot in pastry, especially for like making macarons and things like that, where you don't want to adjust or mess with like the liquid percentages in things. They can be used a lot. Like when you're making, I don't know if you've seen like the super cool croissants, like bi and tricolor croissants that they're making at like Supermoon Bakehouse or Mr. Holmes.
I haven't.
They're so bitchin'. They're like tie-dye croissants.
That's super
They're
cool.
so cool. They're so cool. So, but for something like bread, you've got to keep your baker's percentages very precise. And so your hydration levels, as we refer to them. So a way that bakers will add color to things without really adding flavors is by using pigment powders. And most of those are just like every other color. Most of those are artificially derived. There's one brand that I've used before and had pretty good luck with that's called Nature's Flavor. And that is, I can't say that I've totally closely inspected the labels because sometimes we just want a color, so we're just going to go for it regardless.
Right.
But they're as close to all natural as you're going to get. Now you can get freeze-dried fruit powders. We use those as well. And freeze-dried vegetable powders. There's a brand out of New Zealand called Fresh As that we really like, but the colors are super vibrant, but you're going to get some of the flavors, so if you're working on something that you want hot pink or red, raspberry is really great to use, but you just have to know that it's going to add some of that, bright acidity, which might be fine,
Sure.
But if you're really wanting it to be neutral, I would say that Nature's Flavor pigment is probably the best that you're going to get if you want to keep it natural. There's a few other brands that aren't natural. True Color is one of them, and it gives you super vibrant colors, but you're working with straight up dye.
So we're talking like red dye number 4s. We're talking about okay. And I think that it's important to know the ingredients that we're working with, as far as like where they come from and kind of the reputation they have. Is so having those two in our back pocket, the Nature's Flavor and the Fresh As from New Zealand, are really great coloring agents. I don't think we've really incorporated it into beverage programs nearly as much as we should. But also sometimes you just need that big, vibrant punch of color. And if you can kind of weed it out that synthetic flavor a little bit and maybe use it sparingly, I think it might have its place as well if, you just can't quite achieve that color that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're really not worried about, if you're okay, like say you're working on a strawberry elderflower, champagne spritzer or something like that. A lot of times what I'll do is I will make fruit, for lack of a better way to put it, like fruit consommes. Okay. And I've taught bartenders and mixologists how to do this before, and it's super simple. You just I always use IQF fruit, because even though you might be working with something that isn't, hyper local, or it might not be in season, when that product is picked and processed, it's actually at the very best it's going to be. So some people a lot of times view like frozen fruits as being less than. I mean, I certainly wouldn't use it to like finish a dessert in terms of garnish, but in terms of flavor, you're going to get way better flavor from that than you are from like, some Driscoll's that you pick up at the market in January.
Right.
And so for those, it's really a simple process. You just take the frozen fruit, and say you have like 2 pounds of frozen fruit. You're basically making a super concentrated simple syrup. So it would be like 2 pounds of frozen fruit to like 8 ounces of sugar, and you toss it in the sugar. You wrap and put it in a bowl, and wrap the whole bowl really tightly in plastic wrap, and then you cook that over a double boiler. Like you put it over a pot of simmering water. And basically what that does is it really slowly cooks the fruit, and you're using the steam that's created, but you're certainly not creating a vacuum, but you're keeping it in a really airtight environment. And you're cooking it slow and low, so you're not oxidizing the colors or flavors at all. Right. And so if you do that like with strawberries or raspberries, you get this super dark pink liquid that's really, really concentrated, both in terms of flavor and color. You can do the same thing with blueberries, and it usually comes out a really pretty lavender color once it's added to liquids. Blackberry makes a really beautiful, like kind of a jewel tone purple. It works best with berries, just because I find that the flavor compounds in berries tend to pair, at least for me, other than like passion fruit, which is also really, really floral. I find that berries tend to have more of those floral notes that pair better with alcohol. I'm personally not a huge fan of like mango in cocktails, I find it just doesn't have that like lightness. And and the color is weird. It doesn't, you get this weird orangey color, but making those berry consommes is another great way to get really intense color. If you're okay with it's not so much a flavor when you do the consommes as it is more in the nose. So in some ways that can be really great.
Yeah. And I think, before we go too far, you mentioned IQF. Can you tell us what that stands for? Oh,
sorry. If I'm dropping too much industry lingo, you just throw it back at me.
No problem,
that is individual quick frozen. So if you're going to work with the frozen fruit, you want to make sure that you're just using the individual quick frozen fruit versus like sometimes, when you go to the market, they'll have it in the frozen section and it'll be in a syrup.
Right.
You don't want to get into that for a variety of reasons. One, it's going to throw your ratios off, but also sometimes those have corn syrup or glucose in them to kind of stabilize them.
Sure.
And while I use plenty of glucose in pastry, it just messes with the body of the consomme and makes it really viscous versus being super nice and thin so that it disperses evenly and then doesn't throw your sweetness levels off in your cocktails.
Got it. Okay. I just want to make sure we understood that, because I assume there's a huge difference between that and the one that has a sweetener in it. So thank you for clarifying. And it's funny, like there's a gentleman by the name of David Arnold. He runs a couple of beverage programs in New York.
Oh yeah, I love David Arnold. He's amazing.
Liquid Intelligence is one of the best books out there for cocktails. And this is one thing, a little tip that I picked up from him as well, is like if you are trying to incorporate out of season fruit, the best possible thing you can look at is frozen. Because to your point, they capture it right at the peak of its freshness. It has all that amazing flavor that you're really looking for, and kind of preserves the aromas. So that's a fantastic tip. Thank you. And then with the steam, does that kind of help, like the lower, slower kind of cooking of it? Does that help to kind of preserve the nuance of the fruit? Because I know, like, if you just blast it and throw it in a sauce pot with a bunch of syrup, you're going to blow off a lot of those kind of really light aromatic compounds. Yeah, it preserves, it preserves the nose is really the best way to put it. I don't want to say that terpenes is actually 100% the right term, but it's that same sort of thing, where especially with berries, and plums too, stone fruit, any fruit that's working from more of a flower base for it. You want to keep those floral notes up front if you can. Same with quince. Anything that you want to try and make sure that it's really it's so hard to describe, but a lot of times, like when I'm working with berries, as a way to make the berries taste more like a berry, I'll add elderflower. Crazy. And not so much that you're even tasting the elderflower, but it's like, it makes the strawberries especially taste the way you want them to smell. That's so crazy. Yeah. Well, that's going to my back pocket. That's cool. Very cool. Well, thank you. That's absolutely huge as far as like techniques and like really kind of extracting the best possible product out of seasonal ingredients. That's really, really helpful. So thank you. And now, as far as other techniques, adding color to the cocktail, there's a lot of different ways we can do this. As you mentioned, the consomme and the syrups are a fantastic way to kind of give the cocktail itself some depth and some color. But as far as like garnishing, like when you're plating desserts and when you're making kind of that visual element, are there other garnishing techniques that you would recommend, or any other products that you would recommend for adding that color or complementing the color on the plate? There's a few out there. I tend to work, personally, I tend to work very organically, and I try to not have a bunch of elements on my plate. There's a few things you can do. Some of them can be transferred, into the mixology world from our side by, working with some agents like agar-agar, or getting into a little bit more of the modernist cuisine stuff and making gels. Or I personally hate the little caviar things. I think it's grody. I don't like things that pop in my mouth, but some people do, and you can get into some stuff like that. But I like stuff to look like what it is. Like you know what I mean? Like, right. So I find that there's some things, like some people are really into using like cocoa butter sprays. And you can definitely use these really great, we use them in chocolate work. They're called power flowers, and they're just hyper pigmented cocoa butter. And you can add those, you really want to add those to like white chocolate. And you can make like a really beautiful, like if you were working with more of like a creamy blended cocktail, you can really easily color a really simple white chocolate ganache with these power flowers that are just little hyper pigmented flowers that you break into petals and melt them into your chocolate. And you can make, they give you like the little Pantone color wheel, when you're like trying to pick out the color paint for your house. Right. And you can
come up with like, I think it's literally like 1,000 different colors.
Wow.
Just using the different formulas. So if you want to do something, like if you wanted to, you know, especially if you're doing maybe more of like a dessert type cocktail and you wanted to dip the rim, you can make a thin enough white chocolate ganache that it's, you know, going to be drippable at room temp. And those are super easy to do. And they tell you the exact formulas, and the flowers last you forever because they're so hyperpigmented.
And so the company is called Power Flower?
Yeah. Yeah. And most of our stuff, any of our stuff that we use, we get most of our stuff from either Chef's Warehouse, or Chef Rubber. Chef's Warehouse is really in the industry, you know, it's nationwide, and I find them to be a really great resource. They're more industry based. For the local home person, modernistpantry.com and chefrubber.com they're, you know, both and the thing that's really great about Modernist Pantry is they sell a lot of their stuff in really small units, like 50-gram units, 200-gram units, versus like, you know, a lot of times if you want to buy this more technical stuff, you're getting industry size
pounds,
you know, amounts, and you do not need 500 grams of Kappa carrageenan in your home. You just don't.
Yeah, and they're actually really great. We interviewed Modernist Pantry I think it was a couple of months ago, and I mean, those guys know what they're talking about. I mean,
oh my God, they're so cool.
Rabbit hole of just knowledge and information, and I kept asking them
so beyond my scope.
And he's like, "Oh yeah, this is how you do it." I'm like, "I wanted to make a blue cheese foam. How do I do it so it doesn't suspend it or mix in the cocktails?" Like, so what you do is blah 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 blah. I'm like, "Oh my God."
Yeah,
the things that are in your brain are so amazing.
They're crazy. It's so beyond. I mean, like, I'm so old school. Like, I'm 45. I've been doing this for 30 years. Like, all that stuff is like so out of my realm. And like, my sous chefs are younger than me, and they will be talking to me, and they're like, "Well, you just do this." And I'm like, what language are you talking? I understand the consonants, but they don't make sense when you put them together.
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah. But you know what's funny? What's interesting is one of the big trends that's going through our industry right now is edible paints, painting the inside of the glass. And kind of, you know, maybe even introducing some flavors in there. It's something that's just been blowing up recently within the last year.
It's super. You can use the cocoa butter and the power flowers, and if you want, you can, you know, add in the freeze-dried fruit to that. The powders, those can kind of mess with the consistency a little bit, but there's a couple companies out there. One is called Amaretti, and we use them at the Cheesecake Factory for flavoring our cheesecakes. And Amaretti is super cool because they make these really intense flavor extracts, but they're all naturally based.
Oh, interesting.
And most of them, if I remember correctly, and I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn, but I believe most of them are in a neutral alcohol base. So, which is what we need in cooking for that liquid to evaporate.
Sure.
But Amaretti is all natural. They don't do any weird stuff, but they're super intensely flavored. And so you can add stuff like that. And then Pre-Gel is another company that makes really strongly flavored flavor compounds. I like to use them in the fillings for our macarons. Sure. Because we use buttercream base for our macaron filling. So if we don't have something that's really intensely flavored, it can't get past the fat of the buttercream.
Sure. Yeah.
So those are great. Like if you want to make an edible paint that's got some flavor.
Okay. That's really cool.
Yeah. And you can add them even to like simples and stuff. You know, if you just wanted to make like a 3-to-1 simple or something versus working with cocoa butter or anything like that.
Oh, interesting. So you could use the 3-to-1 simple as a base for your paint, and maybe even thicken it up a little bit with one of those modernist chemicals. Yeah. To maybe even stabilize it.
Like xanthan would be really good for it. Grum tragacanth would be good. You know, there's the iota carrageenan would probably be really good for that too. And then if you want to do the edible paints, making like a thinner agar-based fluid gel. Agar is to me, out of all that stuff, the agar is the easiest to work with. In my world, we're super used to working with grams and gram scales,
Right.
you know, but it's not for everyone. It's not even for the savory side of the kitchen. When I'm like, well, you need 10 grams of this. They're like, yeah. It's, okay.
How many handfuls is that?
Exactly.
That's
Right.
too funny. Oh, man. Cool. Well, we got a bunch of great ingredients to look at. I will definitely put those in the show notes for the podcast as well. So thank you. And I think those are going to be really great because, like I said, one of the big trends right now is that edible paint. And I think looking into those flavor compounds, looking into, the 3-to-1 simple syrup is a great starting place. And then we can really have some fun experimenting with, the thickness and how fast it distributes into the cocktail and stuff like that. So really do appreciate it. I've had this conversation with like 4 different people in the last week. I'm trying to figure this stuff out. And I knew all I had to do was talk to a pastry chef. And they were like, oh, no, it's super simple. All you have to do is this. So...
Yeah, we say that all the time and we get the blank stare from everyone we say it to.
Definitely appreciate it. So cool. So,
no problem.
Now, when you're talking, I have another question for you. I haven't really sent it over, but I think it's really important. And that is, when you're talking about the color red, the color also gives consumers or the people that are going to consume your meals a very kind of like a mental picture of what that flavor is going to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what flavors would you lean on if you're going to have a red focused pastry? Spices, fruits, and all that stuff. If we can talk just quickly about it.
It really depends on the shade of red. Like we are working on this strawberry pistachio entremet that we do for the case here that, and it was beautiful. And it was really great. And I was like, I really love it, but that's not, that color pink that they were glazing it with doesn't connote strawberry.
Right.
And I was like, it needs, so it really depends on what shade of red.
Interesting.
Like a more purpley red, people are automatically thinking it's raspberry. It's got to be a little bit more of a brighter, hotter pink for strawberry.
Mm-hmm.
Cherry, we need to make that super bright red pink,
Mm-hmm.
And so it really kind of, I have to adjust it based on, pretty much just those 3 flavors. We don't really work. I do a couple savory pastries, but they're not super duper popular.
Mm-hmm.
But even like one that's super hard to get across to people is pomegranate. That one's really, really hard to get that
Mm-hmm.
reddish purple right. It always wants to go brown. But and trying to do it like macarons is the perfect example. We especially at this time of year, so many pink, red, purple, so many different shades in between. But we did these ones that were the best, like cherry red, like this like lipstick red macaron, and they were cranberry cherry, and people were just going nuts for them
Mm-hmm.
because of the color. Like they looked like a cherry on a tree. But I find that usually as soon as people see red of any sort, the first thing they think is raspberry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably just because in my field, that's the flavor people want the most, which is interesting because when I am thinking cocktails, when I think raspberry, I automatically think framboise. And so I think like more purpley.
Right.
So it would definitely be the ground berries or the berries first. And then, no one ever thinks currant. I gave up on currant. I couldn't make it happen, even though they grow everywhere here. Yeah. So definitely, and especially here, like it's so hyper seasonal here after being in, growing up in strawberry land,
Mm-hmm.
like, about April 1st, people are looking for a certain color, red or pink in the case, and they know what it means and they want all of it. And then, the only other color red that we really sort of work with a little bit, is when we've tried to work with hibiscus, which is a flavor that I love. And it's such a beautiful color.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it to be a little bit of a polarizing flavor for people. It's like, you don't know how to really get it across to people because it just has those really strong tannic notes that if you don't balance them right, for some people it kind of sends their palate a little bit off.
Sure.
And the couple times we've tried to work with hibiscus here, like people just were like, it's like purple food. I can't do it,
Who does this?
Yeah.
This is Eugene, man.
Yeah, it's coming, man. It's trying. It's doing its best.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, because this is something that really I don't haven't really thought a lot about, but color definitely indicates flavor, especially when it's focused on dessert. So getting those colors right will definitely represent more of what's in the cocktail as well. So I think looking at those particular fruits are really, really important to get that color kind of dead on to kind of really kind of communicate that to guests. Now, as far as like spices, I think the only one that I could come up with as far as like flavor equals color, and this is not a good example, but cinnamon, because of like, when you're a kid, you have red hots and they're always like red. So is there any other spices that come to mind for you for denoting that kind of color red?
I wouldn't say spices necessarily. I mean, definitely chilies.
Okay.
But chilies are really hard for us to work with. There's been a few times when I've done, like spiced chocolate desserts, more for when I was working with the Asian concept, and I would do candied chilies, to put with it. But it's just, I think that, America as a whole still has a long way to go before, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, clove, like they want apple pie spices. That's pretty much all America wants in terms of spice in their sweets. And so it can be even just like including what seems to me to be more basic stuff like, star anise or cardamom, that can even send people sideways.
Sure.
I really like to use pink peppercorn. I love using pink peppercorn, especially when I'm working with pineapple. It also matches really beautifully with melon.
Oh, interesting.
Like growing up in Southern California, you have like the fruta carts, and you'll get the chili and cucumber, or chili and mango, like tagine. Like if you do not understand the importance of chili sauce on mangoes, I do not know what to tell you. You are missing out.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's so good. And so I did a really great dessert last summer with melon with and some pink peppercorn meringue and a little Szechuan peppercorn mixed with it to kind of get that little bit of numbing effect. And it really threw people kind of sideways. But once they got in it, they were like, oh, okay, like I see what is happening here. But the Western palate, especially the American palate, is just really pretty limited in terms of what they see as acceptable in terms of different spices in their food.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, like looking at cuisines outside of the United States, they fully embrace, like Indian food is like all about the spice combinations, and everybody has their own spice combination. Yeah. And I mean, it's just this big, deep flavor. And I was talking to somebody recently, and I couldn't figure out the American equivalent of it. And I think the closest I could get was barbecue.
Yeah.
Like as far as like deep spice flavor, and even that is like a lot of sugar on top of it. So it's like,
I mean, you're definitely going to see it like in some Tex-Mex, foods, and it isn't even safe to say American because like the best thing to compare it to would be like moles, but even moles have so very barely gotten past, anything that runs along the border. Like it's my jam and I will eat all different kinds, but anything that we would consider quote unquote American in terms of our spices, it's still going to be like usually pretty heavily Latino influence,
sure.
Mesoamerican influence. Like I grew up in California, in Southern California, so I'm used to those flavor combinations. Mm-hmm. My boyfriend did not. And, it's like, there's definitely, flavors and things that I gravitate towards that I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, like you did not grow up on the West Coast. Like this was not indoctrinated into you at the age of 2, like it was, you know, into me. And moving here to the Pacific Northwest, even though I've spent a great deal of my time here before I moved here, it's like, it's a very common refrain among those of us that have migrated to the Pacific Northwest about, like, you know, like those memes about like, oh, you know, don't make it spicy, don't add salt. But yeah, it's just not part of the American lexicon. It's just not part of like who we are as folks. Right. I have a lot of family that's from the South, and so there's a little bit more of it there, but it's the same thing. Then you're dealing with like Afro-Caribbean influence, you know, they just don't grow here, you know, they just don't grow here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I absolutely understand what you're talking about. And before we actually live in Southern California now, but before we lived in the Bay Area, which is such a melting pot of cuisine in San Francisco. And, you know, you are exposed to all these different crazy flavors and combination of ingredients. But yeah, it can definitely be a challenge in other places. So now when we talk about like other colors, I think you mentioned a couple of really great companies that offer some great pigment powders. Is there any other ingredients that you would look at for like if we wanted to do it ourselves and like maybe even like dehydrate and grind down some beets? Is there any other ingredients that you would kind of push people towards to say, okay, if you want to do DIY this, I don't know why, because it would be so long and so kind of like time expensive. But any other ingredients you would look for to kind of really bring that big punch of color?
You know, it's really hard when you want to DIY it, because the more intense color usually means more product used. And the more product used, you're also intensifying the flavor.
Sure.
And like the color blue doesn't really occur in nature.
Right.
You know, it's the color blue is just kind of our mind tricking us for the most part. When we see it in flowers and stuff, it's got more to do with the, you know, prismatic refraction than it does the actual true color. And so in food, even stuff like you've mentioned, like butterfly peas, even stuff that starts one color and seems one color, you know, as soon as you start adding other ingredients to it, you start messing with the pH, you almost can't keep blue. You know, so I would say if you're trying to DIY it, just give up on the color blue. It's not going to happen. You know, just accept what level of purple you're okay with. That's what's cool about like that nature's flavor is they actually, for however the heck they did it, they have a blue.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But, you know, I used to be really into traditional food preparations when I first moved up to Oregon. And so I was doing a lot of dehydrating. And dehydrating is great in terms of intensifying flavors, but you do have color loss when you try and dehydrate things yourself. Freeze drying is really the very best way to keep the color as sharp as you can get it. So I know that there's like some home freeze drying things, but I don't think anybody's going to go buy one. They do sell a lot, like Trader Joe's sells a lot of freeze dried stuff, and Whole Foods does. So you could always get that and grind it up, you know, and pass it through a sieve to kind of get out some of the lumps and bumps. But you just have to know that you're going to take flavor on. Like there's just, you know, it's pretty much impossible to not get it, especially if you're working at home. Like, I remember one time I wanted to just do a test. And so I had a bunch of tomatoes from my garden and I pureed them and I dehydrated them and ground it down and made like a tomato powder that was, you know, but it was a beautiful color, but it was super intensely flavored. And so you could juice. If you have a really good juicer, you could juice, but you're still going to get some flavors. It's just.
I think the when you framed it up as, you know, the flavor and the color are so kind of paired together in kind of the compounds that exist in that liquid. I think that is I mean, it makes a lot of sense that you wouldn't be able to separate the two out.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't like, I've never understood the blue raspberry thing. Like, I don't know when we started blue raspberry. I think that was our generation that did that, and I apologize. But like, like I want, like, if I'm going to have, like, if I'm going to have something that has raspberry in it, it's like we were talking about the interplay between when we see a color and what our mind actually automatically starts to think that color, connotes in terms of flavor.
Right.
Like, if I have a pink drink, I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be like berry flavored or, prickly pear flavored or hibiscus flavored. I'm already like in that mindset.
Right.
So if I drank it and it had none of those things, I would be like, why am I drinking this pink drink that is not bringing me these things to the table?
Right. It's like, why does it taste like bacon? That's not right.
Exactly.
That could be a fun little, like, April Fool's experiment, like completely go for one color and look sweet and just give them a straight up savory drink. Yeah, that would be, that's not a bad idea. Or like, like the miracle fruit thing. Right. Oh gosh. Yeah, that's too funny. Perfect. Now, when you're talking about like plating and design and like really drawing your somebody's eye to a dessert, is there any colors that you would kind of avoid as a complement to the red?
The thing that's really great with the red is it does go with almost everything. If you're thinking just like natural foods, and natural food colors, red goes with just about everything. Mm-hmm. Our brains don't really like blue in terms of food. For whatever reason, they found, that blue food it tricks something in our reptilian brain that makes us not want it. Like, there must have been a mass extinction that was caused by some like bright blueberry, a million years ago or something. That's the only thing I can figure. So. No, I mean, I'm doing, our dessert for Valentine's tomorrow. Obviously has a lot of red in it. So there's really not anything. The only thing I would be careful of with it is creamy colors, like whether it's like actual like creme anglaise or whipped cream or vanilla ice cream, that sort of stuff, just because if those two colors bleed together, it's not the best looking look, for whatever reason. But no, I mean, red really, I mean, it depending on whatever thing you put with it, like if you put, mango or something like that with it, it's gonna pull all the different tones of the red. Is it going to be more blue or, and so certain colors will make it seem warmer and other colors will make it seem cooler. Right. It's pretty universal.
Yeah, and as long as you kind of keep them separated, right? You don't want to mix a bunch of colors together.
1992 happened. Yeah, we're no longer feathering our sauces together. We want to leave those days behind us. Probably the only other color, and it's probably just because it's so cliched, is like, like the obligatory mint sprig on the desserts. I don't really like green with red. Mm-hmm. But again, it depends on the thing. You know what I mean? But
right.
But for me personally, I don't usually tend to like those two together, but I'm sure it's just PTSD from like mint sprigs everywhere.
Well, that was like the pastry equivalent of was it parsley? Chopped up parsley for decades.
Yeah. And then we just moved to full-on branches of parsley. Just lay that whole thing on there. They'll chew on it. It'll freshen their breath.
It's so good. It belongs on every dish. I mean, throw it on a hamburger. It makes it look fancy.
Exactly.
That's too funny. Oh, excellent. Okay, this has been really great. I think getting your understanding as far as techniques and other ingredients that we've used behind the bar to really bring more color to our cocktails has been really, really helpful. So thank you so much. And like I said, I want to respect your time. I know you're kind of in the middle of prepping for Valentine's Day. So thank you again for joining us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. And before we go, is there anything that you would love to promote? I know, your menus, your restaurant, your Facebook or Instagram or anything like that.
Well, if anybody does come to Eugene, I certainly welcome and encourage you to come to Marche or to one of the Provisions locations, just so you can see we're Eugene in general, and especially Marche. Stephanie was really, really at the forefront of lauding and making the most of what we have here locally. So she's really, if you want to see what the Willamette Valley is really all about, coming and eating at Marche is a perfect place to see all of our wonderful things come together. And I'd love to feed you all my desserts. Or come to Provisions and eat one of our fantastic croissants. You can have those too. For me personally, I just have my own personal Instagram page that I put, some of my food and stuff on there. You're also just as likely to see the travails of a single mom as you are, me trying to pat myself on the back for making pretty food. And that's just Amy Mirate. Ray is in Skywalker, 3018 on Instagram. But that's it. My life is cooking and kids. That's my world.
That's beautiful. That's fantastic. So once again, thank you. We'll include all the show notes on our website over at mixologytalk.com. And Amy, like I said, I really do appreciate your expertise, your sharing of knowledge, and also your time. So thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. Have a wonderful and happy Valentine's Day, sir.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So once again, thank you to Chef Amy for joining us on this podcast. It's always great to have a professional's insight into some really cool techniques from the pastry side. And like I said, pastry chefs are kind of the best friends of mixologists. Great for building your skills and techniques. And she definitely over-delivered for the podcast. So we'll have a link to all of her recommendations in the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/172. Now, we've had our shop up and running for a little while now, but if you haven't realized it, we've got some really amazing bar tools. So if you want to go check those out, those are over at shop.abarabove.com. And I'm a little bit partial, but I think they're pretty stinking good. So we'll have some more podcasts for you guys in the future. But until then, cheers. Have a great shift. Have a great shift. Have a great shift.